Hello. This is Ravindra. I'm an expert in pharmacovigilance, ICSR case processing and quality review. In this video we will look into some basic fundamentals in pharmacovigilance, like validity assessment and regulatory clock start date, specifically in the domain of individual case safety report. So, let's start. In the video lecture of common terminologies in PV, we have learned that ICSR is a single case report of AE or ADR experienced by a single patient after a medicinal product use at a specific point of time. Also, please note that ICSRs are the building blocks for PV. And, this subdomain of ICSR in PV, requires huge manpower for operating. When compared to other domains of PV like aggregate reports, signal management, etc., timelines for submitting a qualified ICSR to health authorities are quite less and stringent. So, we will look into those regulatory timelines for ICSR submission requirements in another dedicated slide. For now, I would like to make you aware that ICSR Operations forms the significant basis for entire PV domain. So, how do we get the safety data from patient? What are the possible channels for getting patient safety data relevant to medicinal product use? So, here are the common sources listed for obtaining a safety information with potential ICSR elements. First one is the clinical trial source, which is a standard collection of safety data from trial participants, or we can say, clinical trial subjects. A clinical trial can either be fully sponsored by a pharmaceutical company or can be a clinical trial which is supported by company. There are Phase 4 studies conducted after granting license for a product to enter into market. These can be called as post-marketing studies or programs. Ideally for evaluation of safety and efficacy for an investigational medicinal product in clinical trial, special population subgroups like elderly, children and pregnant women are not included, and the moment the new medicine enters into the market, the safety knowledge of that particular medicine in these special populations like pediatric, geriatric and pregnant women is still uncertain due to lack of their study in clinical trials. So, there are pregnancy registries, which is a kind of post-marketing Phase 4 study for knowing the safety profile of a medicine in pregnant women. And, these post-marketing studies acts a crucial source for standardized collection of safety data for a marketed medicine. And, published medical or scientific literature is one of the significant major sources for safety information. A literature article may contain study results, or it can be simple case report relevant to single patient or series of cases concerning an adverse reaction with medicinal product. And, the last but not least one is the spontaneous source. Name itself says, spontaneous means a normal voluntary reporting from anyone who actually experienced or observed medicine side effects. A spontaneous case report may originate from a healthcare professional like physician, or pharmacist or nurse who noticed side effects in their patients after treatment with a medicinal product. And, spontaneous case may be directly reported from a patient or patient care provider for a medicine side effect. So, the spontaneous source has huge potential for contributing to the safety knowledge of medicinal product after marketing. However, the limitation of spontaneous source is that collection of safety data is not organized, and there is significant lack of essential data for analyzing that case, and more importantly it is difficult to make a follow-up with reporter of spontaneous case, in comparison with ease of follow-up possibilities that exists for other sources like studies. So, we have seen major possible sources for collection of safety information. Now, what's next? How shall we determine that collected safety information comprises a valid element to qualify as an ICSR? For an ICSR to be considered as valid, it should contain these 4 elements. An identifiable reporter. An identifiable patient. A suspect medicinal product and an adverse event or an adverse drug reaction. So, identifiable reporter can be a physician, pharmacist, any other healthcare professional like nurse, physiotherapist etc., can be a lawyer is who working for his client concerning a medicine's significant side effect. And a reporter can be a direct product consumer, means the patient or patient care provider. And for any of these reporters, there should be one standard element for their identification such as name, initials, their address etc. The second essential element is an identifiable patient. In the collected safety data, it should contain a valid identifiable information for patients such as patient initials, date of birth, age, gender, age group or any specific patient identification number, which happens if it is a study case information. You can keep this in mind, for any studies or programs, patients or study participants has their unique identification number as part of study protocol. And this unique number can be considered as identifiable information for the subject or patient. Third mandatory element for an ICSR is a suspect drug. It should have an identifiable generic name or brand name of at least one single medicinal product. And another element required for making an ICSR as valid is presence of an adverse event or adverse drug reaction in the collected safety information. So, when the case data or an ICSR does not contain any one of the four elements discussed now, then, that particular ICSR is called as an invalid ICSR or an incomplete case. An invalid ICSR becomes valid when the missing element information becomes available. So, the assessment of validity for an ICSR is usually done at initial phase, the case triage step. Now, let's have a high-level overview of where case triage happens during ICSR operations. In case triage, validity assessment happens for the presence of four elements in a document received from any of the sources which we discussed earlier, like clinical, spontaneous, literature article etc. Upon assessment, valid ICSRs has to be registered into safety database. This step we called as case book-in or case registry or case ID creation. In this step, the basic information of four essential elements for valid ICSRs are entered into safety database for registration. Post that a unique identification number will be generated for that particular valid ICSR in database. Once a case ID is created, it will be further processed, which we called as case processing, where the remaining details from source document will be entered into database and case safety narrative would be generated based on the available information. Once the case processing is completed, that particular case will be submitted to respective health authority as per requirements and specified timelines. After that case will be moved into archived state for record and storage purpose. This is a high-level overview which we have seen in this slide for understanding where the case validity assessment step sits in general workflow, other steps involved in case triage and the detailed steps of case processing and submissions will be presented in another video lectures. Now, let's look into the concept of Day Zero in ICSR. Each and every pharmaceutical company or MAH has the obligation of submitting the valid ICSRs into health authorities of respective countries where the product has been licensed for marketing. An ICSR has to be submitted to health authority in a specified timeline depending on local submission requirements. For examples, European Medicines Agency requires submission of ICSRs in either 7-day or 15-day timeline, depending on some other criteria like seriousness, causality and listedness. These three concepts we will discuss in another video lecture. For now, you need to get an idea of importance of submission timelines for an ICSR. In order to determine the due date for submitting an ICSR, it should have a Day Zero for calculating the due timeline for that ICSR. So, Day Zero is nothing but the regulatory clock start date for determining the submission timelines. Day Zero determination varies depends upon source of ICSR. If any ICSR originates from sources such as clinical trials, post-marketing studies or spontaneous, means all sources except the literature source. Day 0 is the date when any person or representative or a contractor receives valid ICSR elements for reporting. So, a couple of examples mentioned here for your better understanding. On April 4, 2022, Safety Department of Company receives a serious adverse event document from study site. It is direct receipt and the date of receipt, April 4, is considered as day 0. In the second example, Safety Department received information via other department of company who are also part or representative for the company, hence, May 18, is considered as the day 0, considering the initial receipt of information by a company representative, even though Safety Department received on the next day. If an ICSR is originated from literature article, day 0 is the date of awareness of a publication containing the valid ICSR elements. Ideally, date when the literature search was performed becomes day 0 for that particular ICSR. For example, on April 8, 2022, a PV specialist performed literature search and on same day, review performed and identified ICSR elements requiring submission. In this scenario, April 8 is the date of search which becomes day 0 for the ICSR identified in the article. Let's look into another scenario. On April 15, 2022, a service provider performs literature searches. On April 17, 2022, specialist performs review and identifies ICSR data elements. In this scenario, April 15 is the day 0, considering the date of search performed, even though ICSR elements identified 2 days later during review. Simply, date of search is the date of awareness that becomes the day 0 for ICSRs from literature sources. Both validity assessment and identification of day 0 are essential concepts to know in ICSR case triage step. In the other video lecture, we will further discuss about other fundamental concepts in PV ICSR domain. Thanks for your attention to this learning content. If you like our videos, please share your feedback and do subscribe to this channel for latest learning videos in PV and for motivating us to create more valuable content to PV community. Thank you.